Greetings once again and welcome to another awesome edition. In this edition, we are going to be answering a very important question, which is looking at deriving the quadratic formula. And the question there is, where does this come from, our quadratic formula? So many of you by now should be aware that whenever you are given a quadratic equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, you can opt to use the quadratic formula to be able to solve what x is. You've been doing this from your early secondary school years up until now. And in this video, we need to explore how did we come to this formula. What do we need? What we need is the ability or is the understanding of how do we complete the square and also simplifying. So let's go to the next page. So what we will first write is a quadratic equation. And what you should remember is that we are trying to derive the quadratic formula. There's a difference. So whenever you see the term quadratic equation, what should come to your mind is an expression that is of this form: ax squared plus bx plus c. But for the purposes of our problem, what we are going to do is we are going to equate it to 0 and then solve for x. So we are going to have ax squared plus bx plus c, and this will be equal to 0. So remember, this is an equation, and what we are trying to find is a formula that will allow us to solve this quadratic equation. So how are we going to do this? So the first step is to factor out the common, not common, but is to factor out a. So completing the square, remember, is very important in our doing of this. So what we aim to do is to first complete the square. And in completing the square, the first part or the first thing we are going to do is to remove this a, because whenever you are completing the square, you always want the coefficient of x squared to be 1. So we need to take out a common factor of a. So let's go ahead and take out our common factor. Not common factor, but a factor of a. So if we take out a, you will see that our x will now be left with x squared, but it will now very importantly have a coefficient which is 1, of which that is what we are speaking about in this paragraph here. And then plus, what you should see is that now we'll need to accommodate the a by simply having a division by a, and then we'll have x and then plus c over a, like this, and this will be equal to 0. So if you remember, if we require this to be 0, it means it is what is inside the brackets that must be 0, because if we make a to be 0, then already this is no longer a quadratic equation. So it is this which must be 0, which is inside the bracket. So which means we can rewrite this as our x squared plus b over a times x plus c over a equals 0. So now we go to our next step. If you remember, whenever you're completing your square, what you need to do is now to focus on this term. And if you remember, what we do to that term is you will have x plus half of that term all squared, and then plus c over a minus the term which we have halved, which is the coefficient of x all squared. So what does that mean in simple or in mathematical terms? What we are saying is that we'll have x plus half the coefficient of x. So the coefficient of x is b over a. So this means we'll have b over 2a. And then you square that, and then you'll have c over a. Then you will minus exactly what is here, which is b over 2a. But very importantly, you square it, and this is still equal to 0. Okay, so let's try and simplify this a bit. So what you will see is we'll have x plus b over 2a all squared, and then I will end up having a c over a, and then minus, if you observe carefully, we'll have b squared divided by 4a squared, and this will be equal to 0. And remember, what are we really trying to look for here? What we are ultimately trying to find is x. So let's go ahead, take this to the next page and start working around this and see what we can do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to quickly make a common denominator here. So if you look carefully, this means that we are going to have x plus b over 2a all squared plus, if I want to make a common denominator, I have an a. So it means I need to introduce a 4a on the numerator and also introduce a 4a on the denominator, which becomes 4a squared. And then this becomes divided by b minus b squared divided by 4a squared. And this, remember, is equal to 0. So I can now transpose all of this to the right-hand side and make a common denominator. Or maybe let's do it on the left. So we'll have x plus b over 2a all squared plus, if you look carefully, we have a common denominator now. So we'll have 4ac minus b squared divided by 4a squared. And this will be equal to 0. Okay? So if you observe carefully, we can now go ahead and simplify this. So we are trying to solve for x. So I will take all of this to the right-hand side. Okay? And if you observe carefully, we'll have x plus b over 2a. And this is all squared. And this will be equal to, you should note the signs. So the b squared term was negative, so it will now be positive. So we'll have b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. And if you remember, if I now want to eliminate the square on the left-hand side, because we want to solve for x, it means I need to introduce a square root. And guess what? When we introduce a square root on the left, what we should also do is to go and introduce another square root on the right-hand side. But what we remember is that when we introduce a square root, it's not just one solution that we actually get. We get two solutions. So the solution which we get is plus or minus. So just think about it, because if you square back, the square will eventually cancel the square root and also the negative, if there is, which would come out of that. So this means what we now have is x plus b over 2a equals, if you observe carefully, plus or minus. I need you to remember that whenever you're looking at a square root, the square root there is also a square root on the denominator. So it will be a square root on the numerator, which is b squared minus 4ac, but it will also be a square root on the denominator. So we'll have the square root of 4a squared. So if you look carefully, this means that we'll have x plus b over 2a equals plus or minus, we have the square root of, if you observe carefully, we have b squared minus 4ac, and this will be divided by, when we take the square root of 4a squared, square root of 4 is 2, and square root of a squared is just simply a. So now we can transpose and have a by itself by simply taking this portion to the right-hand side. So if you look carefully, our x now will be negative b over 2a, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And if you observe carefully, you should be able to see that we have a common denominator. So therefore, we can find our answer x by simply collecting those. So we'll end up having negative b plus or minus the square root of our b squared minus 4ac, and all of this is divided by 2 times a. This is how you derive your quadratic formula. So what we have now at the end here is what we refer to as our quadratic formula. Let's make some space. So that there is our quadratic formula. And it is a very useful formula, especially when you cannot factorize from the top of your head. Let me give you an example where this would be useful. So let's consider this example. So let's have a look at this problem. So let's say for whatever reason you are unable to factorize this, or you've forgotten your work. All you need is for you to just go and say, you know that your quadratic equation is simply ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is your quadratic equation. And what we know is that when you are given your quadratic equation in that form, you can go ahead and look for your quadratic formula, which will be negative b. And we've proven this: square root of b squared minus 4ac. And all of this is divided by 2a. And what we have here, which we are going to use to solve for x, is what you refer to as your quadratic formula. So we are now in a position to go ahead and identify our a, b, and c, and then plug them into our equation. So if you observe carefully, you should be able to see that the value of a is 2, the value of b, which is what multiplies x, is 3, and the value of c is 1. So which means we can now go ahead and plug, since we are required to solve for x. We'll plug into our quadratic formula. So we'll have x equals minus our b, which is 3, plus or minus the square root of our b, which is 3 squared, minus 4 times our a, which is 2, and our c, which is 1. And this will be divided by 2 times our a, which is 1. So if you attempt to simplify this, what you will see is you'll have negative 3 plus or minus. Inside here, you are going to get 9 minus 8, which is going to end up giving us 1. And then this will be divided by 2. So which means one of the x's will be, when we have a plus in between, plus 1 divided by 2, which will be, if you observe carefully, minus 1, or the other x will be when we have a minus in between. So we have negative 3, negative 1 divided by 2, and that becomes negative 2. So we now have our solution. So your solution, in case you struggle to factorize, would be x is negative 1 or x is negative 2. In fact, let me just double check this. My apologies. If you look carefully, a is not 1, a is 2. So let's quickly replace that. So we'll end up having negative 1 over 2 for this one. Sorry, it is a 2, so which means we'll end up dividing by a 4. So this means we'll end up having negative a half, actually, if you think about it. Let's go ahead and quickly erase that. So 2 times 2, that will be a 4. And we will end up having a negative half. And also, if you look carefully, we'll have negative 3, negative 1, and this is divided by 4. If you observe carefully, you should be able to see that this will end up being negative 1. So that is what we obtain as our answers. We get a negative half, and we also get a negative 1. So others would have easily been able to see from the word go, looking at that problem, that if you have 2x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0, all what you need, since you have a plus 1 and a plus sign in between, it means you have a plus 1 plus 1. Then you put in 2x and you put in x here, and this is equal to 0. So if you observe carefully, that becomes 2x plus 1 equals 0, or x plus 1 equals 0, of which when you solve, you'll have 2x equals negative 1 or x equals negative 1. So therefore, when you divide by 2 for this problem, you will see that our x will just become negative 1 over 2, or the other one will be negative 1. So I hope you do understand this, and you now have an idea of where our quadratic formula comes from and how to best use it to solve your problems. Okay? Cheers. I also hope you enjoy the rain, the sound of it. Cheers, guys.